Dead Rising 2 is a game I've never really spent enough time with over the years, as I've dedicated my time on this channel to preserving the history of the first game, and doing so has kept my plate pretty full. And as a result, I don't know a whole lot about the sequels of Dead Rising, more than the average person. I sure as hell doubt I could ever learn a quarter the amount of information I know on the first game with these sequels, but it's never too late to at least check out Dead Rising's successor. Seeing as my knowledge on the second game is a bit scarce, I feel my time is better spent looking into things that are not well documented, or things that perhaps not everyone has seen or has the ability to see. I don't have all the facts on the development of this game, but one thing I am pretty familiar with is its debug mode. In a previous video, we learned that the debug menu in the first Dead Rising was pretty uneventful. There's not a lot going on. But in Dead Rising 2, I'm glad to say it's the complete opposite. To make a video that would cover every single debug option available in Dead Rising 2, this video would be at least over an hour long. So instead, I decided, similar to the first video, making things as brief as I humanly can. The debug menu is enormous, but it can be condensed into a handful of useful, interesting functions that are actually worthwhile to show. So, with that said, let's jump right into this. Let's see what Dead Rising 2 debug mode has to offer. So with debug mode, not only do you get a menu, but you also get some extra features in the title screen. These features are used to jump the player to specific locations around the game for testing. There's also a bunch of test levels that we can go visit, which are perfect for exploring the game further. Now, moving on to actual features of the menu, the first ones you'll see at the top are the camera editors, which can allow you to enter debug flying camera. Now, unlike in the first game where the debug camera was only used for flying around, in Dead Rising 2 you can also move the player to wherever the camera is located. This is useful for when you want to place Chuck in some out-of-bounds location to go exploring or whatever. Below the camera options, we have our general debugging options. In here we can toggle quite a few debug strings and gizmos and whatnot. There's quite a few things in here, but I'll spare you the technical mumbo-jumbo. It's basically just the hub for drawing the essential debug overlays onto the screen, such as frame rate and build date. Nothing really important to us, so let's just move on to something more fun. Next we arrive at the AI page, which is humongous. The AI menu pretty much covers every single in-game character code throughout the entire game. And we're gonna spend a bit of time in here, so let's get started. Within the survivor menu, there's this posse page that can allow us to spawn a group of random survivors to join us. You can also tune the size of the posse, and you can spawn them defected or calm or injured and all sorts of interesting states. When you're done with them, you can also destroy any survivor near the player. There's a lot of debugging options available in here, which can print out some pretty awesome information about stuff, as well as tuning variables to make survivors behave however you want, but again, it's a lot to cover, so I'll spare you the details. In the zombies page, it's much of the same as before. You can spawn any zombie model you want and with any amount. You can also spawn every single variation of a selected zombie model, which I find is fascinating, as you can get a better look at all of them and see truly how many there are. You can also spawn item carrying zombies, which is pretty fun to make an army of item zombies. Hands down, my favorite feature is being able to force the LOD models on zombies, which makes them look like Play-Doh. Moving on, we have the NPC menu, which again is pretty similar to the other two. We have the ability to spawn any survivor model we want rather than a random posse member. You can also spawn quite a few characters that were never meant to be seen, like placeholder characters and whatnot. A lot of them in this list don't seem to want to spawn, however, but that could be due to how early the build is. Of course, there's also the usual debug utilities like always. Next we move on to the clothing page, which is really only useful for changing the player's clothing on the fly. One really amazing thing in here is that because of this being an early build of the game, the full Mega Man costume from the first game is available for Chuck. This kind of blew my mind. There's also an emote function in here where you can trigger any of the emote states you want, and while you're here you can also unlock all of the clothing in the game. The vehicle menu is mostly for debug stuff, however there's a vehicle spawner in here too, which is pretty awesome. You can spawn all sorts of strange vehicles that you're never meant to use in certain areas, and even some that I'm not even sure are in the final game. The save and load menu is a gift from God pretty much, as you can pull up the save state UI anywhere you want, rather than having to use a predetermined save location. You can also set a nap point, which I have no idea what that's supposed to do, but it never ended up being used in the game. You can also cause a game over screen anytime you want. The clock menu is useful for tuning the game's time. You can also modify how the time itself actually works, such as enabling double, quad, and even warp speed. You can also jump the clock to nighttime, which states that it won't cause a transition, yet you still get a transition. Liar! And finally, the last of the AI page, we have the boss menu. Now this one is pretty amazing, as you can force any boss fight within the game at any time. You have to be inside the area where the fight is meant to occur, however, otherwise the boss won't load. If you select a battle that can actually load, it'll warp you to a starting position with some random weapons. There's a debug page for basically every boss battle in the whole game with hundreds of options. It's pretty insane. Every boss has its own unique tunable debug settings, which is fun to mess with. The missions menu has all sorts of debug crap for cases and quests in the game, and it's all very complex stuff. One of the more interesting things in here is the addition of Auto Chuck, which is a debug utility to force Chuck into an NPC state, which will have Chuck complete various tasks on his own through AI when prompted. There's a few different states of Auto Chuck that you can cycle between, like Zombie Killer, Item Picker, and whatnot. The AI behind the Auto Chuck feature is honestly kind of freaky to watch just by how good it is. I don't really trust it. I always have this looming feeling that it's going to take over the world. Next we have the render page, which is also a massive function and would take about 2 weeks to fully cover. Within the visibility page we can toggle on and off a bunch of asset rendering stuff like hiding the player, removing the HUD, and whatever. One of the weirder things you can do in this page is drawing debug lines, which creates these gizmos around the map, and more of them can be found in the sorting menu lower down in the render page, which will draw a shitload of them. The render page is also chocked full of lighting tweaks and debug tunables that you can mess with. You could spend forever going through the options in here, tweaking the lighting and effects to exactly how you want them to be. It's pretty amazing and a really powerful debug tool. Not many games have settings like this. I'm not really sure why Capcom added something this in-depth into Dead Rising 2, but I'm glad they did. The audio page is pretty sweet, as you can draw a peak meter. I'm sure all of the audio aficionados out there would love looking at this stuff or even understand what this is. There's also a bunch of other random audio debug junk in here, but I won't claim to know anything that I'm looking at. The cinematics menu is really useful, as you can play any cutscene you want at any time. What's weird though is that while you can force any cutscene to play, there's no option in this menu to jump to different levels, which you would think would be a basic feature, but no. Dead Rising 1 takes the cake on this, as the debug menu in that game has a whole page dedicated to area jump, which is a treasure. I'll never understand why Dead Rising 2 doesn't have this. Or maybe it does and it's just hiding deep in the menu and I'll never find it. And lastly, our final interesting debug page is the weapons menu. It retains all the same debug utilities and debug tunables that we've come to know in every other page. Of course, the whole point of the weapon page is the spawner, which can allow you to spawn essentially any game object available in the files. You also have a toggle in here for infinite weapon durability too, which is nice. And that brings us to the end. Dead Rising 2 debug mode is truly a diabolically large feature to explore, and it's hard to do it any justice just by covering the most appealing features in the menu. But it's really the only way to do it while remaining sane. I can't really tell how many videos I'll make on Dead Rising 2 because I don't like to be inaccurate or unsure about a topic that I make a video on, as I feel it's then not worth anyone's time. So if I feel I can make a video on this game on a topic I know pretty well, I'll do it, but as of right now, this is certainly a Dead Rising 1 channel, so don't worry. Hopefully you enjoyed this descent into Dead Rising 2 debug mode. If you want to keep up to date with stuff I do that goes unseen on this channel, you can follow me on Twitter, and you can also come check out my shenanigans on the Discord server. You can catch me there pretty much all day. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more.